Right, so let's talk about Viego, the ruined king, a man who destroyed an entire kingdom because he loved his wife too much, or maybe because he didn't know how to love her properly. There's a difference, and it matters. Viego was never supposed to be king. He was the second son, the younger brother, the kind of person history usually forgets. He was vain, self-absorbed, interested in pleasure and beauty, and the easy things that come with being royal, without the weight of responsibility. His older brother was the one being groomed for the throne, and that suited Viego just fine. He didn't want to rule. He wanted to live. But his brother died. That's how it always starts in these stories, isn't it? One unexpected death and the whole world shifts on its axis. Viego was thrust onto the throne of Camavor, an ancient and powerful kingdom, and he was completely unprepared for it, genuinely. Not the theatrical unpreparedness of someone who secretly wants power, the real kind, the kind where a person looks at a crown and feels nothing but dread. He ruled, though. Not well. Not badly either. He just existed as king. Delegated most things to his advisors. Chief among them was Callista, his niece, a general, a warrior, a woman of conviction and principle. She was everything Viego wasn't. Where he was passive, she was decisive. Where he was self-absorbed, she was duty-bound. She ran the kingdom while Viego spent his time with the only thing that actually mattered to him. Isolde, she was his wife. And the thing about Viego's love for Isolde is that it was real. That's the tragedy of it. It wasn't a political arrangement or an obsession built on fantasy. He genuinely loved her. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was kind. She was the part of him that was good. Without her, there was nothing holding the decent parts of Viego together. And then she was poisoned. Someone, an assassin, a rival, history isn't entirely clear on who, slipped poison into Isolde's drink through a needle hidden in a rose. A poisoned thorn. The kind of detail that feels almost too poetic to be real. She didn't die immediately. She lingered. She faded slowly while Viego watched, helpless, desperate, spending every resource his kingdom had to find a cure. He called healers from every corner of the world. He consulted mystics, alchemists, anyone who claimed to have knowledge of death and how to reverse it. None of it worked. Isolde slipped further and further away, and Viego became less and less recognizable as the man he had been. The grief consumed him, quietly at first, then loudly. When she finally died, something inside Viego broke. Not in the dramatic way you see in stories where the hero falls to his knees and screams at the sky. It was more like a thread snapping, a structural failure. The part of his mind that understood reality simply gave way. He refused to accept it. That's the key. He wouldn't believe that Isolde was gone. And when a king refuses to accept reality, reality tends to bend. Not in a good way. Word reached Viego of the Waters of Life, a magical place in the Shadow Isles, a land steeped in ancient and powerful magic, a place where the boundary between life and death was thin, thinner than anywhere else in the world. Viego saw his answer. He gathered his army, put Isolde's body in a glass coffin, and marched across the sea to the Shadow Isles. His advisors begged him not to go. Callista, his niece, the one who had kept the kingdom running while Viego grieved, she was the one who told him the truth. She said the Blessed Isles were real, that their waters held great power, but that the dead could not be brought back. She had seen enough of the world to know that some borders were not meant to be crossed. She begged him to let Isolde rest. Viego didn't listen. He ordered Callista to lead his army to the Blessed Isles, and because she was loyal, because loyalty is sometimes the worst quality a person can have, she obeyed. There was another who followed, though, Hecarim, the head of the Iron Order, Viego's personal guard, a warrior who had always craved glory, who saw in Viego's madness not tragedy, but opportunity. If the king wanted war, Hecarim would give him war. If the king wanted to storm a sacred place, Hecarim would storm it. There was no principle in Hecarim, only ambition. And that matters later, genuinely. They arrived at the Blessed Isles. That was its name before the corruption, before the ruination. It was a place of healing and wisdom, tended by caretakers who guarded its sacred waters. The wisest among them was Thresh, a scholar once, a keeper of knowledge, a man who had dedicated his life to understanding the boundary between life and death. He was the one who tried to turn Viego away. He told the king that the waters couldn't bring back the dead, that some things were beyond even ancient magic, that violating the natural order would have consequences beyond imagining. Viego didn't care. He forced his way in. Hecarim's soldiers cut down anyone who resisted. Callista watched in horror as the place she had led them to was desecrated by the very army she commanded. She tried to stop it. She turned on Hecarim, on the king's men, fighting her own soldiers to protect the sanctity of the Isles. It didn't matter. Hecarim killed her, his own comrade, his own general. He drove a spear through Callista's back while she was trying to do the right thing. And that betrayal, that specific, personal, intimate betrayal, became one of the great tragedies of the Shadow Isles. Callista would return later, of course. The dead don't stay dead on the Shadow Isles. But she would return as something else, something bound to vengeance, forever seeking traitors, forever reliving the moment she was murdered by the people she tried to save. Viego carried Isolde's body to the waters of life and submerged her in them. And for one brief, terrifying moment, it worked. Isolde opened her eyes. But here's the thing that changes everything, the thing that makes this story a tragedy instead of a fairy tale. Isolde didn't come back grateful. She came back afraid, confused. She had been at peace, and Viego had dragged her back. She didn't want to be here. The dead don't always want to return. She lashed out. In her terror and confusion, she stabbed Viego through the chest with his own sword, the blade that would become the source of so much suffering, the blade of the ruined king. Viego didn't die. The waters had changed him, but Isolde's spirit fled, shattered into pieces, scattered across the world, and Viego, heartbroken, stabbed through the chest by the woman he had just torn from death itself, went completely mad. The magic of the waters of life, corrupted by Viego's grief, his obsession, his refusal to accept loss, erupted outward. It consumed the Blessed Isles entirely. Every living thing on those islands was touched by the ruination. The caretakers became wraiths, the gardens became wastelands. The beautiful sacred place became the Shadow Isles, a realm of undeath, where the dead don't rest and the living don't belong. And Viego became the ruined king, crowned not by ceremony, but by catastrophe. He sat in the wreckage of what he had done, still holding on to the belief that he could get Isolde back, still convinced that if he just tried harder, searched longer, killed more people, he could fix this. The others were transformed too. Thresh, the scholar who had tried to warn Viego, became something terrible. The black mist twisted him into a wraith, a creature that collects souls, that tortures the dead for pleasure, that keeps them in his lantern forever. The man who once dedicated his life to understanding death became its most devoted servant. There's a dark irony in that. The caretaker became the jailer. The scholar became the torturer. And the worst part is that some part of Thresh enjoys it. Some fragment of the man he was still exists inside the monster, and it takes pleasure in the suffering of others. Quietly, methodically, with the patience of someone who has eternity to work with. Hecarim, the ambitious knight who followed Viego for glory, became a centaur of bones and fury. Half man, half horse, all rage. The Iron Order, his soldiers, the ones who had followed him into the Blessed Isles, became spectral riders, bound to Hecarim forever, charging across the Shadow Isles in an endless, meaningless cavalry. The glory Hecarim had craved became a curse. He got exactly what he wanted: eternal war, eternal battle, eternal conquest. And it means nothing, because there's no one left to conquer, just the same grey wasteland, the same shambling dead, the same empty victories over enemies who are already gone. And Callista, poor Callista, she returned as the spear of vengeance, a spirit bound to punish betrayal. She hunts those who break oaths. who betray trust, who stab their allies in the back. But she's not merciful about it. She doesn't distinguish between justified betrayal and unjustified. She doesn't understand context or nuance. She just kills. Because that's what the Shadow Isles does. It takes the best parts of people and twists them into something unrecognizable. Callista's loyalty became obsession. Her justice became cruelty. Her duty became an endless, meaningless loop of violence. That's the thing about Viego. He never learned. Even after destroying an entire civilization, even after becoming a monster, he still believed he was doing it all for love. And maybe he was. But love without acceptance isn't love, it's possession. And Viego couldn't tell the difference. For centuries, Viego remained in the Shadow Isles, gathering power, sending out his agents, the Black Mist, to search for fragments of Isolde's soul. The mist would sweep across the land, touching everything it reached, corrupting the living, raising the dead. Wherever it went, it left devastation. And at the center of it all was Viego, sitting on his throne of bones and sorrow, waiting. The Shadow Isles itself is a place worth understanding, not just as a setting, but as a reflection of Viego's mind. The corruption wasn't random, it was shaped by grief. The landscape mirrors his inner world, twisted gardens where beauty has rotted into horror, towers that crumble but never quite fall, pathways that loop back on themselves like the obsessive thoughts of a man who can't stop replaying the moment he lost everything. The black mist that rolls off the Isles isn't just a weapon, it's an expression. It's what happens when sorrow has nowhere to go, when it becomes so vast and so heavy that it spills outward and consumes everything it touches. The people who live near the Shadow Isles, on the mainland, in the towns and cities that border the sea, they know the mist. They've seen it creep inland on certain nights. The nights when the boundary between life and death is thinnest. They board their windows, they light their lanterns. They tell their children to stay inside. And sometimes, despite all of that, someone is taken. Someone wanders into the mist and doesn't come back, or they come back wrong, changed, hollow, a vessel for something that isn't them anymore. That's the quiet, ongoing horror of the Shadow Isles. Not the dramatic battles or the epic confrontations, the slow, steady loss, the constant erosion, the way it takes people one by one, family by family, generation by generation. It's a wound that never heals. Because Viego never stops, he never rests, he never gives up on finding Isolde, and so the mist never stops either. The Sentinels of Light were the ones who stood against him, an ancient order dedicated to fighting the forces of the Shadow Isles. They carried weapons forged from light itself, relics capable of pushing back the mist. For generations, they held the line. They fought the wraiths, the ghouls, the horrors that crawled out of the Shadow Isles. But they could never reach Viego himself. He was too powerful, too protected, too deep in his fortress of grief. Lucien and Senna were among the Sentinels. Their story is its own tragedy. Senna was taken by Thresh, captured, imprisoned inside his lantern, with thousands of other souls. Lucien spent years trying to free her. Years of fighting through the Shadow Isles, of battling wraiths and monsters, of losing hope and finding it again. When Senna finally escaped, when she broke free from the lantern through sheer force of will, she was changed. She carried a piece of the mist inside her, a darkness that she could use, that she could weaponize, but that also threatened to consume her. She and Lucien became partners not just in love, but in war. Two people bound together by loss, fighting to make sure no one else suffered what they had, until the Sentinels of Light event, when Viego finally made his move, when he assembled enough fragments of Isolde's soul to attempt a ritual that would bring her back completely. He tore through Runeterra, leaving destruction in his wake. He corrupted champions, twisted them into versions of themselves that served his will. He turned heroes into puppets. He was unstoppable, until he wasn't. The thing about unstoppable forces is that they always meet an immovable object eventually. In Viego's case, it was the combined will of champions from across Runeterra, Akshan, Gwen, Lucian, Senna, and others, who came together to stop him. Not because they hated him, not because they wanted revenge, but because what he was doing was wrong, because the dead deserve to rest, because love doesn't give you the right to destroy the world. The final confrontation happened where it all began, in the Shadow Isles, in the place where Viego had first submerged Isolde in the waters of life. And when it was over, when Viego was finally defeated, he didn't rage, he didn't scream, he just looked confused, as if he couldn't understand why everyone was against him, as if dragging his dead wife back from the afterlife and destroying entire civilizations in the process was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. They sealed him away, imprisoned him in a place where he could do no more harm, and the Shadow Isles remained, a permanent scar on the world, a reminder of what happens when grief becomes obsession, when love becomes possession, when a king refuses to let go. But Viego's story doesn't end there. It never does with these kinds of characters, because the thing about sealing someone away is that seals can break, prisons can fail, and a grief that powerful doesn't just disappear. It festers, it grows, it waits. There's a quiet horror to Viego that goes beyond the obvious. Yes, he's a Lich King surrounded by undead. Yes, he commands the Black Mist. Yes, he's responsible for one of the worst catastrophes in Runeterra's history. But the real horror is simpler than all of that. The real horror is that he still thinks he's the good guy. Even now, even after everything, Viego believes he's doing the right thing. He believes that if he can just find the last fragment of Isolde's soul, she'll come back to him. She'll love him again. Everything will be fine. He'll be happy. And that belief, that pure, unshakable, completely delusional belief, is what makes him dangerous. Because you can reason with a villain who knows they're a villain. You can negotiate with someone who understands they've done wrong. But you can't reason with a man who thinks he's saving the world while he's burning it down. You can't negotiate with someone who genuinely believes that destroying everything is an act of love. The champions who fought Viego didn't just face a powerful enemy, they faced a mirror, a reflection of what love looks like when it goes wrong. And that's harder to fight than any army, because somewhere, deep down, they understood him. They understood the impulse, the desire to bring back someone you've lost, the willingness to do anything, sacrifice anything, destroy anything, if it means one more moment with the person you love. But understanding isn't the same as agreeing, and mercy isn't the same as weakness. The champions stopped Viego not because they were stronger, in many ways they weren't, but because they understood something he didn't, that the dead deserve peace, that grief is not a license for destruction, that love, real love, sometimes means letting go. Gwen was perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle. She was, in a sense, a fragment of Isolde, a piece of Viego's dead wife, given form and life. But not in the way you'd expect. She wasn't a ghost or a resurrection. She was something new, a doll that Isolde had made, imbued with a fragment of her soul, brought to life by the same magic that had torn the Shadow Isles apart. She carried within her a piece of the woman Viego had destroyed the world to reclaim. And she was nothing like Isolde. That's the cruel part. She was cheerful, curious, alive in a way that Isolde had never been in her final days. She loved the world. She loved being alive. She loved the simple things. Sunlight, flowers, the taste of food. She was everything that Viego claimed to want but couldn't recognize, because Viego didn't want Isolde to be happy. He wanted Isolde to be his, and those are very different things. Gwen chose to fight against him, not out of hatred, out of love, the kind of love that Viego couldn't understand, the kind that lets go. She fought for the world, for the living, for the future. She fought against the man who would destroy everything to reclaim a woman who didn't want to come back. And in doing so, she became something Isolde never had the chance to be, a hero in her own right. Akshan's weapon played its part too, the Absolver, a relic capable of reversing death, the very thing Viego had been searching for across centuries. But Akshan used it not to bring back the dead permanently, but to undo the damage Viego had caused, to restore what the ruination had taken, a temporary mercy, not a permanent violation of the natural order. There's a difference between healing and resurrection, and Akshan understood that difference, even when Viego never could. And Senna, and Lucian, two people who had every reason to want death reversed. Senna had been trapped inside a lantern, a prison for souls, for years. Lucian had fought to free her. They understood Viego's pain better than almost anyone. But they chose differently. They chose to fight for the living instead of dragging back the dead. When Viego was finally sealed away, there was no triumph, no celebration, just a quiet, exhausted sadness. Because even in victory, the cost was enormous. The Shadow Isles remained. The dead still walked. The mist still seeped out on certain nights, touching the edges of the world with cold fingers. And somewhere, in his prison, Viego still reached for Isolde, still called her name, still believed she would come back. That's the tragedy of Viego. Not that he was evil, not that he was powerful, but that he was human. Flawed, broken, unable to accept the one thing that every person must eventually face, that the people we love will leave us. That loss is part of the deal. That grief, when handled with grace, makes us better. And when handled without grace, it makes us into monsters. The weapon he left behind tells its own story. The blade of the ruined king, the sword Isolde used to stab him, the one that was supposed to kill him but didn't. It became one of the most feared weapons in Runeterra, not because of its sharpness or its enchantments, but because of what it represents. It steals life. It drains the essence of whoever it cuts, and it heals the one who wields it. A weapon that takes from others to sustain yourself. There's a metaphor in that so obvious, it barely needs explaining. Champions across Runeterra have sought the blade, some for power, some for necessity, some because they had no other choice. And every one of them has felt it, the pull, the whisper, the quiet suggestion that maybe, just maybe, there's a way to take what you need from the world without consequence. That's Viego's legacy. Not just the Shadow Isles, not just the mist, but the idea that you can take what you want if you want it badly enough. The idea that love justifies anything. The Shadow Isles stands as a monument to that truth. A beautiful place, destroyed by a beautiful love, corrupted by a beautiful inability to let go. And in the centre of it all, the ruined king sits on his throne, waiting for a woman who will never come back, surrounded by the ashes of everything he sacrificed in her name. There's a lesson in that, a quiet one, not preachy, not loud, just there, like a whisper in the dark. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is grieve, really grieve. Feel the loss, let it wash through you, let it change you, and then, eventually, learn to carry it. Not to overcome it, not to fix it, just to carry it. Because the alternative, the path Viego chose, leads somewhere much darker than grief. It leads to a place where love becomes a weapon, and the person you're trying to save becomes the thing you've destroyed. And if you're lying there right now, thinking about someone you've lost, someone who's gone in a way that can't be fixed, know that it's okay. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to ache. It's okay to wish, just for a moment, that things were different. That's not weakness. That's not obsession. That's just love. Doing what love does when it has nowhere left to go. But let it be love, not possession, not desperation, just love. The quiet kind. The kind that remembers without demanding. The kind that honours without destroying. That's the kind of love that saves kingdoms. The other kind is what burns them down. Take your time with that. There's no rush. The story will still be here tomorrow. And so will we. Rest now. We'll talk again soon.